I think everybody needs to understand, whether we recognize it or not, we're all selfishly motivated. So if I'm starting a sales call, even if I'm quote unquote excited about the product, I'm not excited about the product. I'm excited about what the product's going to do for me. You're fucked. That sale's going nowhere until you figure out how they can see the value in the next yes. So that's your sale. Like every sale has about 7 to 50 little sales in them. And each one of those little sales, everybody paying attention to the podcast, every one of those little sales requires value.
Meet Keenan. He's all about getting the customer to say yes. As the author of Gap Selling, he's here to increase your sales by changing everything you know about relationships, overcoming objections, and closing and pricing. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Long sales cycles, price objections, no decisions, prospects going dark and ghosting you, and continuously missing your quota? This podcast is for you. Keenan has sold over 100,000 copies with Gap Selling, and he's here on kickoff sessions to help you do the exact same thing. What's up, people? Before we get into this video, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment down below so we can get bigger, better guests for you every single week. Let's get straight into the video right now. All right, man, let's kick off. So where I want to start is one of your quotes. No one gives a shit about you or your product. Why is that?
I mean, I think everybody needs to understand, whether we recognize it or not, we're all selfishly motivated. Okay. So if I'm starting a sales call, even if I'm quote unquote excited about the product, I'm not excited about the product. I'm excited about what the product's going to do for me. It's not the product, it's what the product's going to do for me. So if I'm all excited to get this new Lamborghini, I'm not excited about the Lamborghini. I'm really not. Because if I were excited about the Lamborghini, I would just sit in it and drive in it and wouldn't care if anybody saw me, right? Or I might just sit in it, right? But I'm excited for what it gets me. So if I want to drive for its performance, I'm excited to get it on the road. I'm not excited about buying it. I'm excited about getting it on the road and feeling what it's like to go super fast, or feeling what it's like to hug those turns and feel the G-forces and maybe, on a closed track, work my driving skills. Like that's what excites me. Well, but for most people, I'm excited about the feedback it gives me and the validation it gives me, because I'm insecure and I want people to know I'm rich. I want people to look at me. So I'm excited about the feedback it gets me. Do you see what I'm saying? So I don't care what it is someone's buying. They're not buying the product. They're not buying your company. They're buying what they perceive in their little brains is what the desired outcome is, or the objective of that purpose. And so if you start talking about you and your company, you're slowing the sale down. You want to keep them anchored in what it is they hope to get from this, and keep them focused in their world, their outcomes, their current shitty situation, what they're not happy with. You just keep them focused on them. And then by default, they will be excited about your product as you show it to them as a method to leave where they are today and get where they want to go tomorrow.
I'm curious to talk about how you think about psychology with the actual buyer. So you mentioned there about the personal desires. How much of that plays much more of a role than maybe the professional desires of increasing revenue or decreasing costs or increasing efficiency?
They're the same. So if I'm working for a company and my remit to be good in that job or to be successful in that job is to reduce lawsuits, or it's to reduce the defects of my manufacturing plant, or if it's to drive revenue, or if it's to make better investments or create better hedging, whatever it is, and you're selling me a product that is somehow, way, shape, or form going to allow me to do that easier, faster, or cheaper, right? Because what I'm doing now isn't working, then I'm super excited because I'm attached to that outcome. I'm personally attached to the outcome of better production. I'm personally attached to the outcome of reducing lawsuits, et cetera. So the personal and business, to me, you can't separate them. I signed up for a job and I'm attached to the outcomes of that job. So if the outcomes of that job are perceived as superior, more effective, or whatever, the outcomes as measured by that role are better, then I'm looking better. They're one-to-one. So to me, there's no difference. They're attached to each other.
Do you actually walk through that process with them and get them to kind of maybe allude to those points, being like, oh, like this is something that you want to achieve, like personally? Is that something you're trying to connect to, or subconscious?
I leave it to the subconscious. No, because if you start trying to sell to the person, that's not scalable. So if you have more than one buyer, you can't take that and go over here and say, well, look, Johnny's going to get promoted, so will you. It's not scalable, right? But if you make it super clear about where are you now and why that bothers you as a person responsible for these things, or the person with the remit to fix these things, and where you want to go, it's so closely tied that you don't have to call it out. They get it.
It's happening underneath the surface, basically. You also have a quote saying, there's no such thing as closing. So I know a lot of young high ticket closers, and they would be very pissed off with a statement like that. Where did you come to that conclusion?
The concept of closing is in a traditional sale is I got done with pitching my shit. There's nothing more for me as the salesperson to do. So now I'm trying to get them to close. Like, I'm done. So now give me your money, right? 99% of the time, if you're at that stage where you're done doing whatever you think you need to do, and the buyer isn't in a place where they can make a decision, you fucked up. You've gotten way ahead of the buyer, way ahead of the buyer. The buyer should get to the place where they want to decide to close at roughly the same time that when you're done, it should be crystal clear. They'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, when do we get started? Right? If you have to ask for the close, you fucked up. You've completely fucked up. So the key is, if you do it properly, it's really clear. And by the time you're done, everything's on the table and you've laid out the gap and they completely agree with you. They simply say, all right, where do we get started? Or no. And if they say no, you go, I'm confused. This is going to solve the problem. You lay out the whole problem. What am I missing? And then you go from there. But you never have to close a customer.
What I love about gap selling is the fact that basically you've done all the work in the beginning. So you've identified the numbers, the impact, the problem, so that you can always reference it. So for people that don't know where your process with the current state, if you're getting the numbers into check, the problems that they have, the impact, the root cause, you can always use it as a proxy to go back, right? And to reverse engineer. Now, my question for you off that is, when you analyze salespeople, their process and everything, where do they fall down on that the most? Is it numbers?
Fully getting the information and defining it. The big one is defining it. So they'll come back and say, oh, the problem is they're making too many mistakes in the manufacturing process. Okay, well, what's too many mistakes? I don't know, they said a lot. Well, what's a lot? Oh, I don't know, I didn't check. Well, how many widgets do they make in a year? Oh, I don't know. How many different types of widgets do they make? About 7 or 8. So when they're making too many mistakes, is it across all the widgets or just a particular line of it? Oh, good question. I don't know. They just don't think. They don't think about the environment they're in. They're only thinking about the sale. Oh, the customer said they make too many widgets. That's a problem. I can fix that problem. Right? They don't stop and say, wait, I'm talking to a manufacturing company. So how many products do they make? Is it 1 widget or 100 widgets? Do they make their own widget and they sell the widget, or are they a manufacturer for clients? And so clients come in, hire them to make the widgets, and they send the widgets to them, and that client sells it. That's very different. If it's my own widget, that's one thing. If I make too many mistakes in the widget, watch what I do. If it's my widget and I sell it to the market, or my number of widgets, and I make too many mistakes, that affects my profit margin, right? And if I ship those widgets, it could affect my customers, but one customer at a time, my brand, okay? However, if I make the widgets subcontract them out to someone else and I fuck that up, I lose that whole contract. See, I make a widget, I make too many mistakes in the widget, but the outcomes and how that affects those two companies are entirely different based on their business model. You see what I've done there? And most salespeople have no fucking clue about the business model they're in, how they do their business, the interconnectivity, and so they're clueless, absolutely clueless.
Why do you think that is, though? Is that a lack of training or a lack of conscientiousness?
Lack of training, hands down, lack of training. And then I'd say, lack of conscientiousness, but I would take a step back and say, because they're trying to sell. Trying to sell gets in the way. You should be trying to solve. A sale is nothing more than a solution to a problem. However, if you are not properly diagnosing the problem, by offering a solution, you are effectively, potentially solving the problem wrong. And so if you don't understand why you're solving the problem, the customer has to do that themselves. So they will, unbeknownst to you, take all the information you gave them about your product and how it's made and blah, blah, blah. And they themselves will try to figure out, will this solve my problem? And sometimes they say, yeah, I think it will. And they buy it. And you're like, oh, I'm the great salesperson. I sold it. Other times, and yet they shouldn't have bought it. Other times it was the right product. They bought it. You feel like a great salesperson, but you actually didn't you didn't do anything. You took an order because you don't know what their problem is. You just do a bunch of shit. And then the worst case scenario is they buy and it's not what they needed. They're like, oh, we think this will work. And yay, we bought it. And yay, I sold another thing. And they start to go implement it. And they're like, this isn't fucking working. This way, it doesn't do this, doesn't do that. And I don't understand. And it's because nobody took the time to understand what they're trying to do, what the current problem was, what was causing it. And you sold them the wrong fucking thing. And they're pissed.
Well, that's always a problem, right? When people don't know why it was right or why it was wrong. So let's say I sell to you and you're like, okay, it obviously worked, right? And if you've ever played poker, there's a big thing in there being like, you could play the right hand but still lose. You can play the wrong hand and still win. But you have to understand, if you take a step back, being like, okay, I was actually trying to play the better hand, and if I still lose, then so be it. So I think without that knowledge and without that area to look back on your work, how the fuck do you know you're moving the right way? And that's how you're going to move sideways throughout your entire career, right?
100%. Yep. That's a great way of looking at it. I like how you did that. Most salespeople have no idea why they sold it. They just know that the person bought.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that could probably come from a company. So before I started my own company, I used to work for big tech companies, especially in fintech, and I was the buyer. You might find this quite interesting. So I was the buyer buying like vendor services, whether it's like fucking some software or whatever. And I remember, because I knew what my problem was, because I was a product owner, I would get on a call and be like, right, we have this issue, some fucking API is like fucked up, we need someone to come in and fix it. And that company will be like, okay, let me walk you through our demo pack, and we'll go through like a 60 slide pack. I'm like, I don't need this. I don't need, and bear in mind, these are huge financial institutions coming out in New York. And I was like, I don't need this shit. What I basically do is I need someone to tell me that these particular areas can be solved and so on. And that was the buyer coming into it. So I thought it was interesting observation. And that's kind of how I started my sales career, was like, well, I don't want to be that fucking person with a 60 slide deck.
Yep. No, you do not. I mean, look, I like those situations. If you had called me and said, oh, my APIs are fucked up, blah, blah. The first thing I would say is, what do you think I would say? My first question would be
the impact, going back to the current problem of that, right? So
tell me, what do you think the question would be? Like, what do you think my very first question would be? We're on the phone. You tell me that my APIs are all fucked up, blah, blah, blah. The first question out of my mouth.
What's the impact it's having on your business? No?
Nope. Okay. I'd be like, what? I would literally say, what do you mean the APIs are fucked up? Could you explain that to me?
And you're trying to get them to walk through like the numbers of it, the situation of it, everything.
Yeah. I want you to explain to me. I just want a definition. What do you mean your APIs are fucked up? And you're going to start telling me. Now, I'm not a techie, so I can't play this out much further. But you're going to start telling me that they're not connecting properly, or they're not pulling the right information, or they don't stay connected, or it's too difficult for other people to write to them. So they start to write to them and can't get it done. You might say it takes too long to write to them. Or if we make a change to the application, the API goes down. We're going to write a whole new API. Like and then a million other things I don't know anything about. But notice the definition of API all fucked up. To a layman, I already gave you like six different reasons why they could be fucked up. And if I don't know those reasons, I think I'm going to start selling you on how I can fix you smoking crack. So as you start walking me through why they're all fucked up and you explain it, then I should be able to connect that to the business problem. So I might say something like, you might say, well, every time we change something in the application, the API goes down, we got to rewrite the application. So I'm like, then I might say, well, then understanding that, who's using the other application? You might say our end users. And I say, okay, so when this goes down, you're telling me that your end users cannot access this application until you rewrite the API. Correct. Yes. How long does it take you to rewrite the API? You might say it could take 2 to 3 weeks each time. I say, all right, well, tell me more about these end users. What are they using the application for? And you might say banking. I'm like, wait, what? You're telling me every time you make a change that the API goes down, these people don't have access to their fucking bank account? They have to go into the bank? Right? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, how many of these people change accounts every time this happens? Like, and that's a fucking great question. I just got an email the other day. So every time this goes down, we lose anywhere from 300 to 500 customers. You see what I did right there? Now, you asked the question, what's the impact? You jumped the fucking gun and went so far down the road that one question, and that person may not have made the connection to them leaving, right? They might not have known that. They might have stayed in a technical impact. Well, it takes us a really long time. It costs us a lot of money to rewrite the API. When you ask that, what's the impact question, that's where it could have taken you. When I started with, what the fuck do you mean by it's fucked up? Then you tell me, I'm like, well, that happens and this happens. And I asked that question and I got to 300 customers. How long has it been happening? What's the average deposit? You mean to tell me since this started happening, you have lost over $70 million in deposits because of this API problem? Yes, they fucking love me because I helped them scope that piece out. And now I'm leading the sale.
How long does that process take you to map out everything? So that those scenarios come in. So when you're usually doing like that gap selling process, so current state, future state, and identifying the gap and quantifying the gap, how long does that generally take you?
It depends on how well the customer knows their information. It depends on how well the customer is willing to be open. So we're working on a big deal right now that we're probably going to walk away from. And after multiple conversations with multiple people, they cannot tell us what the business problem is. And so therefore they can't tell us the impact. And this is going to be a multi-million-dollar investment they're going to make. And they are unable to tell us the business problem, the impact. They know the root causes, but the business problem and the root causes, the impacts across the whole organization. So that one I still haven't gotten. And they're almost ready to make a decision. And really, they're so bad at it. And we pushed them so hard to get it. They're getting irritated with us. And I don't think we're going to win it anyways, because we are just not letting go. We're like a dog with a bone, because we're like, we don't understand why you would make this investment if you can't explain what it's costing you, if you don't change. And they can't do it. Other times, you can get it in less than an hour.
It's interesting, right, that these companies can grow so fucking fast and so big, but then not have an understanding of their numbers and their data, because like otherwise you're kind of pissing in the wind, right? Like I don't understand that. As like a small startup, we try to have like an enterprise view, whereas like I know like most things going on to some degree, right? But how the fuck could you grow these companies without having that foresight?
I got it out of some of the individual business units, but I couldn't get it company wide, right? And it was a company-wide investment. So I was like, okay, that's this one. And even then, all I got was this is where we are now. And next year we want to be this. And it was like a 0.5% growth. And I'm like, that's what you want, or that's what you believe you can get? That's very different, right? That's very, very different, right? I mean, a good example is, I know you're in Bali, but it's like baseball. They have these years they call rebuilding years, right? So they basically scrap the payroll, they get rid of the most expensive players, they retool, and they want to win the World Series, but they realize that, that this year they just got to get past 500, right? So you don't build a plan or bring in consultants or bring in new people to get to 500 that year. You're bringing these people in, so in 3 to 5 years, you can get to the World Series. Do you see what I'm saying? So this company told us where they want to get to next year, but I'm like, you're not hiring us and investing $3 million to get here next year. That's not a sales transformation effort. You're hiring us because somebody believes you're leaving a lot more on the table, but no one can tell us that. So why the fuck are you doing this? Like, what are you expecting to get? And every time we want our salespeople to be better. We want to have the best sales organization in the world. We want our salespeople to stay longer and not attrit. Well, what's your attrition rate? Well, not really sure.
A lot of them are assumptions, right? And they could come from like boring senior management. They're just like, oh yeah, like we just want more, right? And that's the whole problem. So similar to us, when we come up to a company, so we do like B2B podcasts. So let's take an example of your podcast. We basically just like we run the shit out of it, and then we connect the business on the back end. But ideally, when we're looking at people's numbers, they don't know where the numbers are. And then they will say, we want more, but they don't know what the difference is of what they want, percentage or numeric, right? And if they say a numeric, it's fine, we can calculate a percentage. But it's just an interesting observation, right? The fact that most people don't know what they want. And then when you try to walk through that process, you could be met with resistance as a result, because they haven't even thought about themselves.
And they don't know why they want it. And they don't know why where they are is not good. Like, what's wrong with what you got now? Just keep doing what you're doing.
I want to ask you about how you reactivate like dead leads. So this will be quite interesting. So, as I mentioned, what our business is, last year we had a bunch of calls that, like, let's say, or deals that maybe fell through or went cold. And then this year I did a check-in and I did an observation of where they were and where they are now. And I would say 95% of them haven't changed. 95%. They haven't improved, they haven't got better, they haven't made more money, it hasn't looked better. And then resurfacing that to people is kind of painful, right? So I want to kind of get your process in terms of like how you'd reactivate dead leads.
The same way you did. So you already know the answer. Like the same way I would, if you did a proper discovery, I'd call them back and say, hey, John, last time we met last year, you said that you're doing, I'm going to go on a limb here, but you were doing one podcast a week and you had been doing that for 2 years and you had seen a 20% growth year over year for the first years, but you had flattened out to about 5%. You said you were making less than 6 figures in advertising. You said it was harder and harder to get the advertising dollars in. Because you hired an assistant, you weren't as profitable, and that you wanted to get to 300 or 400,000 viewers or downloads, whatever, and you wanted to get to almost $200,000 in podcast revenue. And we didn't work together, so I'm checking in to see, have you hit those goals? How are you coming on that journey? And I'd leave with, have you hit it? And hopefully they'd get back with me. And if they did get back with me and they said no, then I would say, all right, are you comfortable staying here? Or have you come to the conclusion that you need to do something different?
That's what I'm missing. It's those small triggers, I think, that people struggle with, including me, is like, okay, if you understand it, how do you bridge the gap to get people to re-engage? All right, people, we're just going to take one short little break for a little update about Podcast University. So if you enjoy podcasts like this and you want to start your own podcast, head down to the links down below to Podcast University. This is a learning platform that I've built to help people like you build, launch, and scale your own podcast. I wasted many years doing this, making it all up as I go. So I put everything together in a very seamless and easy to follow course for you guys to follow and just learn exactly how to do it. So if you want to bypass a lot of the mess with your podcast, check out the links down below to Podcast University, and I will show you exactly how to launch and scale your own podcast.
Well, it all comes down to, are you happy with where you are? Like, that's the first step in gap selling, whether it's the first time you're trying to sell them or the second time or the third time. The question simply becomes, are you happy where you are? And if not, why? And then if so, if not, then why and what do you want instead? How big is that gap? And is what I'm asking you to buy or what is required of you to do, is that worth, right, the outcome? Is that worth the gap? Is the gap big enough to warrant that? And if it's not, they won't buy. And if it is, they will.
The willingness to change, right? Making that decision to be able to change. That's super interesting, man. I want to ask you about relationships. So why do relationships not matter?
I do that to poke people in the face and irritate them, because a lot of people, they build relationships and they think relationships are everything. And look, I'm not going to bullshit. Relationships provide you access, right? So likability, more importantly, but relationships provide access. But the truth of the matter is, relationships don't make the sale. They just don't. And I'm using relationships primarily in the concept of likability. Relationships built on credibility are extremely valuable, and they drive the sale. So relationships and likability do not drive the sale. Relationships and credibility do drive the sale. And the way you build credibility is you show them value based on their definition, not yours or ours, right? So back to that, if you identify the gap, you have shown them the value of change. Here you are today. So I don't know where I came up with this. I don't know why I thought about this, but I did this the other day in a training. Granted, I wasn't in the room. I'm not trying to judge these doctors, but I feel that the doctors who had Steve Jobs, they're his oncologist, when he was found to have pancreatic cancer, did not do a good enough job of showing him the size of the gap, right? So in other words, if you don't know the story, they found it by accident. Like he had gallstones or something, and they found it by accident. And they wanted to do a Whipple surgery, and they wanted to do surgery. And Jobs being Jobs, he didn't want to go through all. He thought there was some homeopathic ways to beat it and some alternative medicine ways to beat it. So he took 9 months doing alternative shit. And then it spread and got bigger. And then he went back to the regular doctors and they did the Whipple surgery and all that. But unfortunately, they didn't get it all. And so he died 5 years later. My point in that story is, I believe if they were good gap sellers, they should have explained it a lot better. Like, here's your cost of change? Your ego and your belief in these medicines, right? Against almost guaranteeing saving your life. Every day you go longer that you're wrong, you increase the probability that you die from this disease. Right? And then say, listen, do you want to live? Yes. So when you tell me you're going to wait 9 months, let us tell you, based on what we're seeing, because he's a fucking scientist, you can expect this to grow this much. Right now, could you be successful? Could it work? Yeah, yes. But what we know is when it's this small and we take it out, the probability of us getting it all is larger than the probability of it being bigger and spreading. And we don't know how it's going to spread. We think. So to us, this is the cost. What's his name? Steve. The cost is phenomenal. I get you believe this and I get you don't like this, but the cost of you being wrong is far fucking greater than the cost of you being right. Or us being
it's dead.
Right. Yeah.
It's life or death, right?
It's dead.
And that's the biggest fucking gap you can have, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Man, that goes back to the first chapter of your book, which is like the pill, right? When it's like a pill that you use to like alleviate just a small pain. It's like, oh, I don't give a shit about it. I get it for $1 down in CVS. But then if it's a pill that saves your life, you're willing to pay the fucking 30, 40K. And man, that actually happened with the insulin. Was it? I think I'm going to get this kind of wrong, but there was that patent someone had of like insulin and it was like 18 fucking thousand. And the guy's like, I don't give a fuck. Like if you need it, which you do, you're going to pay it. And people paid for it. Obviously, whatever you could say is unethical, but it was he was able to articulate the difference. Question for you off that is, like, so you're like a master of this and it's really good to see like how your brain works with this. Do you convey the message of gap selling through your writing? So let's say your sales letters or your websites and your content, because it sounds like you can do this and let them, through a copywriting perspective, uncover these aspects while they read.
Yep. Look, if you can get the people to read it, you want to do that, right? Now, look, if I do a revision, I'm going to change the emails in it. I don't like them in hindsight and how much has changed and stuff. I don't like them, but still, I just think they need to be creative, right? They need to be creative. They need to be very, very personal and just as seamlessly as possible, get the buyer to be like, yeah, that one. That right there. I can't stand that. Or that's been creeping in. Or I've been feeling that. Or yeah, what do you stand on my plant? Yes. Like, yeah, you get me. That's what you want them to feel when they're either, yes, you get me. I hate that. Or this is happening and I don't want it to keep happening. That's what you want them to feel.
One thing I thought was amazing was the fact that you mentioned is 8 to 12 touch points on average to get someone a response.
I think it's a lot more than that now, but yeah.
What type of reaction do you think you get from people as a result in that process? Because some people will think, oh, if I contact someone 12 times, they're going to fucking freak out at me if they don't want to buy.
Good. Let them fucking freak out. I don't give a fuck. Let them freak out. I'd rather them freak out. I'd rather have 100 freak out and get 2 than lose all 102. That's how I look at it.
Because like, and also I think if I go back on what I was saying was like, if you do the job right, then it should be clear you're pulling out a potential problem, right? You're able to articulate that problem for them. And with a lot of companies that maybe you work with, I say the data is quite sensitive and private, whereas for me, a lot of stuff is public. I can visibly see when someone is doing well or doing bad because you can just see it with their content. So I think that's quite interesting is the fact that if you're able to find out and pick holes in their problems, they shouldn't give a fuck once you're able to actually articulate it.
Yeah. And even if I know they're having the problem, I personally, unless it's super clear and I have specific numbers and I can point to the source, right? I don't like telling people what problems they have. No one likes that, right? Now, if I can point to the source, I'm like, hey, I just saw in your report. Okay, I would have done this for Wells Fargo. I would have said, hey, I just saw what happened with your thing. I saw you doing this. I saw your commission structure. I saw it created this, blah, blah, blah. Understanding that, I'd love to talk about how we built a way to keep those conversion rates without doing this. Right. So now I've got you there. But if I have heard it third party or I think it, I don't tell people. People never like being told they have a problem. But what I do is I'm never going to call up a person who has an eating disorder and say, I know you have an eating disorder. What I'm going to do is say, hey, I know that people in your position, or it's tough because I like to be very personal, but I have to make this up on the fly. Hey, I knowing you XYZ, right? Knowing you have struggled with weight before because you attended XYZ, right? Let's say I have a list of people who attended something. I know for fact that staying on the diet is extremely difficult. I know the frustration of trying to maintain that consistency is difficult. Understanding that, we have come up with a way that makes it easier to stay on leveraging psychology, or makes it easier to stay on leveraging a friend network or whatever. A little hint. We'd love 50 minutes. If you're struggling with this, if this is something you're having a hard time with, I'd love to talk to you about how we can address it. And I just leave it there, right? I just leave it there. And I don't want them to buy into me. I want them to buy into the problem.
That's interesting, man, because basically it's like an indirect way of doing it versus like shoving it down someone's fucking throat, right? Because people don't want to hear that. But at the same time, you're kind of like, I remember my partner's dad is like, he's like kind of old school sales, like medical sales do, like 90s, whatever. And we have like these conversations always. And he was saying to me that his role always was the trusted advisor. I love that term, is that he would just basically kind of walk them through and be like, he put it really well, is that if they would say, oh, should we put $5 million into this fucking medical sales device? He would just say like, you know, if I was in your position, if I had the budget you had, I wouldn't do it that way. I would do it this way. And just be able to kind of walk them through, because it doesn't make them feel like a dumbass, but at the same time, it's winning people to your way of thinking and being able to persuade them to an ultimately better decision.
Mm-hmm. So watch this. So what he did, I get. Okay, but I'm going to see how quick of a study you are. If I'm medical sales and a doctor says to me, hey, I got this $5 million. Should I put it here? Should I put it here? You know, what do you think? What do you think my very first thing I'm going to say is?
Why do you want to do it in the first place? Fuck. Getting them all wrong today.
You've done this twice. You said, what is the impact and why would you? Both times you put it back on the buyer.
Okay. Okay. So tell me more about the problem. Tell me more about the problem you're facing. Close.
Yeah. What I would say instead is, very first words out of my mouth, I don't know. Tell me more about what's going on. Or in that case, I want to spend $5 million. I say, I don't know. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish. See what I did there? Should I spend $5 million here or $5 million here? I don't know. Tell me, what are you trying to accomplish?
So basically, that in the scenario, you're pretty much looking at the goal and the outcome, and then they'll walk back to the problem and the situation.
Yes, I'll walk you all the way back. What we want to do is I don't even know where to go with this, but $5 million investment in XYZ drug. All right, so we want to be able to drive more patients in our cardiac division. Okay, so how many patients get in your cardiac division now? 50,000. Why do you want more? What's going on with the cardiac division? Right? Well, what we're learning is cardiac division is the most profitable part of the entire medical industry. Oh, shit. Well, so in comparison to other hospitals or whatever, 50,000 patients, that's small. Oh, that's tiny. Most have 2 million. Oh, so now because you don't have a cardiac division, what is your profit margin now and what's it been trending? I'm making shit up. Less than 20% and it's trending. It's been flat forever. What is most hospital? I know this is off, so any hospital people, leave me alone. What are most hospitals' profit margins? Well, if they have a cardiac unit, they usually drive anywhere from 5 to 7% higher operating margins than those who don't. Oh, so this is about getting the hospital more profitable. Yes. See what I did there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting because they don't even know where they currently sit, right? It's walking them through that process to begin with. And you would never even thought about that.
I need to know. Even if they do, I'm still not going to, and they nailed it. And they're like, yeah, I would do this. That you're right. You should do it based on what, but I don't know it. So I'm going to give nobody advice. Even in my personal life, I give nobody advice until I start with always, I don't know. Tell me what's going on. Should I break up with my boyfriend? I don't know. Tell me what's going on. Should I invest this money over here? I don't fucking know. Why are you looking to invest? Should I move to a smaller apartment? I don't fucking know. Why do you want to move to a smaller apartment? Literally, it always starts with, I don't know.
Man, a question from that is like, how has sales like helped you in other aspects of life like that?
I think it's the other way around. How has life helped me with sales? I've just always been there to help people. I'm a problem solver, and I realize that I can't solve a problem if I don't understand the problem, right? So I have a tendency, not always, because no one's perfect or no one does something 100%, but I have a tendency before I act to try to understand the problem, okay? So whether it's an emergency situation or whether it's in a business situation. Now, my execution always needs help, and the longer it takes, the worse my execution gets. I'm definitely a spurt worker, and I like things to go fast. So the longer, bigger projects, I'm not as good. I need people around me to help with those. But the initial problem and figuring out what to do initially, I'm very good at. I'm very good at assessing problems, and I'm very good at stopping and looking. And this has nothing to do with sales, but it's the idea of a problem, right? So when I had my first kid, I don't know how it happened or what I was doing, but I just happened to be reading about childhood choking. Now, I didn't go looking for it. I'm not really a worrisome parent, but I just saw an interesting article somewhere on choking kids and what to do, right? So you can't do the Heimlich because they're too little and you could break their ribs. You got to hang them upside down and all kinds of shit, right? But I also learned that you don't do any of that if they're making a sound. Because even if it's not a lot, that means air is getting through. So if it's a full blockage, now you got to do that because air is not getting through. But if air is getting through, then you can pat them on the back or give them a minute, and it'll usually dislodge itself because that air is coming in and out. You know what I'm saying? Right? So anyways, I'm telling the story. My wife at the time, my ex-wife now, and I were at a restaurant, and our oldest, but at the time, our only kid started choking. And my ex started freaking out. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I sat and I was trying to hear if any air was like, it was amazing. I was like, oh shit, I know what's going on here, right? So I started to try to hear if any air was coming out. But my ex was screaming at me and I said, shut the fuck up. And she lost her shit. But I couldn't hear the baby. You know what I'm saying? And because I couldn't hear, I was uncomfortable acting because I couldn't diagnose the problem. See what I did there? Right? Had it been a full blockage, I was going to yank the baby out of that seat and stop pounding and tell someone to call 911 and all that. But if she could get the air through and I heard enough and she's coughing and stuff, I was going to pat her back, right? Maybe push a little on her stomach and give it time to dislodge. If it still didn't dislodge, then we would call 911, make sure she's getting air, make sure she's not turning purple. If she did start turning, then I'd stop pounding. You know what I'm saying? It's a different solution. Do you see where I'm going with this whole thing? So this is just how my brain works. It actually went from this to sales, not sales to this. How do you solve a problem? How good are you at diagnosing what the fuck is going on before you try to fix it?
And that's before jumping to any conclusion, right? That's a perfect example because it's been able. Most people will just jump so super fast, even what your ex-wife did in that example, just to try to get any sort of solution versus like it's getting the right solution for the actual problem that you have. That's the biggest thing, right? Because I think generally in life, people can try to put any sort of solution that's like better than what they have. But if you're selling something to someone, that's completely different, right? Like for instance, like we're building out different systems. Because I can fail forward, I can iterate on it and get it better. But I can't necessarily just like fucking sell something to someone as a result of that. Does that make sense? It's like there's a different mentality that has to be there, but it's basically understanding that. And what I want to ask you from there is about your 4 favorite words, so that I'm confused. You said, what type of like reaction do you generally get from that from people?
Generally speaking, if it's with an existing client and they said all of that, it's usually pretty good. The only time I got a real negative reaction is when I told someone about the process in a sales call and she freaked. Oh, that's not our culture. We would never do that. And she goes, we're not a good fit. And then she hung up. That's the only time I got a negative reaction. But from an actual client, no, never had a bad reaction.
That's interesting. So when they're still like a prospect and you're kind of walking them through, what is it that they don't want to kind of like align to those values as much? Or how does that kind of happen in their brain for them to have a negative reaction?
Oh, I mean, as a prospect, I think she thought this woman was enablement, probably never sold a day in her life. I think she just felt it was too intrusive.
Yeah. Okay. I get you. As if like you're using like data against them to some degree. I know you're not, but that's kind of like how she felt.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said, well, fine. Use the word I'm concerned. I don't give a fuck. Like, but she just didn't get the concept. All she zeroed in on was, whoa, that's too aggressive. We don't sell like that here. And I was like, did you not hear everything that led up to that? The idea with the I'm confused is basically to help the customer understand the decision they're making. I do it with my own kids. It's like, let's say my kid wants to go to Stanford and she's got a 4.4, right? And she went out with her friends, or she's asking me, Dad, should I go I'm going to go with my friends tonight. And don't you have that big final tomorrow? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, why don't you study? Well, I'll be okay. I'm like, wait a minute. You told me I'm confused. You told me that you want to go to Stanford. You got a 4.4. You told me that this test is 50% of your grade. So if you fail this test, then that 4.4 could fall as low as a 4, which could take you out of the range of Stanford. Why is it so important to you go out with your friends tonight when that could put Stanford at risk? Notice as a parent, I didn't tell her she couldn't. You're going to Stanford, take the test. I flipped it onto her and said, you explain to me, based on what you said you want, what you said is going. Notice I said nothing. You said it's 50% of the grade. You said it could drop you to a 4.0. You said it could take you out of Stanford. Stanford's guidelines said it could take you out. You said Stanford's a school you want to go to. I'm just painting the picture.
Yeah.
There it is.
That's amazing.
You tell me.
Man, that's so like impactful, because again, it's not saying that you did something, it's just walking them through that process, right? Being like, you said it to me, we walked through this, that's what you wanted, and now we're trying to get to that crunch time. And it's always at the end, right? Have you noticed that it's always at the end that there's always that conflict? So having those numbers in place keeps people honest, basically, more so than anything else. All right, guys, one short little update for Voex. I want to give a short little overview about my own company, my media company called Voex. So if you are a company or you are an enterprise looking to grow your brand and looking to grow your podcast, feel free to reach out to work with us at Voex. What we do is a fully fledged end-to-end management of your podcast. We take care of the strategy, the consulting, we take care of the growth, the management, we take care of all the editing, all the boring stuff, so you can focus on creating good podcasts and growing your brand. If you want to grow your podcast and get to new users, if you want to grow your business, generate more revenue and all that good stuff, check out the links down below to Voex. You can follow through to schedule a call with our team, or else you can fill out the application form to see if you're qualified to work with us. Thank you.
It keeps them accountable. You're just asking people to be. Now, look, if people can change, look, I may not like it, but that's fucking, I don't want to go to Stanford anymore. It's too much work. Are you sure? Yes. I can get into USC with a 4.0. All right, fine. Fuck it. Go out with your friends. But don't you dare come back to me and be bitching 2 weeks later. Oh, fuck, I wish I hadn't done that. I want to go to Stanford. You've lost that right. You've lost that right. I put it in front of you. You consciously made that decision in the moment. You've lost the right 2 weeks later to say, oh, fuck, I made a mistake. No, because it's not a mistake. It was clear as day. It was a conscious decision.
That's very interesting to hold people accountable, because if you were speaking to a client and they had feedback that they wanted to do something, you showed them the path, they didn't do it. Now, and this is the way for them to be accountable, right? And I've actually seen that in our business quite a lot, because there is a lot of touch points. Like it's a lot going on, like in every business. So people need to hit their own milestones for us to hit our milestones. Does that make sense? It's a domino effect. Like we need to basically all be bought into that process. So when one link breaks in the chain, whether it's a fucking kid going to school, whether it's a company, whether it's a sales company, it's all the same, right? you just insert your own vehicle, basically. What I really appreciate about your book as well is the fact that I think you wrote in the way of like getting a series of yeses. So like sales is getting a constant stream of yeses. And I think that's super helpful, because for a lot of people, they just focus on the outcome, or even when you're speaking to people, they say, oh, like I've sold this much, or I've made this much, or I have this much in pipeline. But really, like the real winning comes in opening the fucking email and then watching the lead magnet and then responding to the lead magnet. That's kind of the way I've kind of changed that philosophy now. So how do you think about that in terms of getting this series of yeses to build confidence in yourself as a salesperson?
The next yes isn't designed to create confidence as a salesperson. The next yes is to make sure you understand where you are in the sales process, because no one says, you want to buy? Yes. Well, almost no one. So it's the yes is what is your sale in the sale. So the sale in the very beginning is, yes, I'll meet you. So your goal is to hopefully get them to buy your software, whatever it is, right? That's the end close. But in order to get them to buy your software, the first thing you got to do is get them to say yes to meet. So how do you create enough value for them to meet? Once they meet, then the next thing you have to do is say, what's my next yes? Is it to bring in new people? Is it to do a demo? Is it to get them to get to sign an NDA? It's like, what is the next yes? Because nothing else is happening till you get the next yes. So if they don't perceive enough value for the next yes, that's where a deal stalls. Or if you don't know what the next yes is, that's where the deal stalls. So your job is to figure out, okay, my next yes now is to get them to sign the NDA. So you're like, all right, Tom, I'd like us to sign an NDA, which will allow you to give us all this information. And if you can give us this information, this would allow us to A, B, and C, and that would allow you to see this or do this or check this. Do you think that makes sense? Yeah, that I would like to see that. I will get this NDA signed, the cost, if you give me or to get me this. You see what I mean? That's a transaction. So once you have that next yes, and I give you that, then you say, okay, now that he's got that, what's the next yes? Is it to get him to agree or could solve his problems? Is it to get him to bring the CEO in? Is it get him to do, I don't know what the fucking next is. I'm making this shit up as I go. But once that's done, okay, what's the next yes? You're trying to show him enough value to do that. And every one of those should get you closer to the close so that the final yes is, I'm buying.
That NDA part is super interesting. As in, you could open up so much more doors with that. I know obviously in a B2B relationship that might be more regular, but I guess in smaller companies, they might not have that in place a lot of times. So then people will not give them the information they need. This is the best way to bridge that gap to get more information, to be able to help them even more.
I mean, if that's the buying cycle, I just made all of that up. I'm just trying to think of common steps that I could use to illustrate what a next yes is. But if you don't need an NDA, don't make that an unnecessary yes. The next yes could be, I agree to you coming out to my plant, right? A lot of people don't have time. I don't have time to fucking have some guy come walk through my plant. So I've got to convince you to agree to give me a plant tour, right? So then if that's my next yes, all I should be focusing on in my sale right now is how do I show this guy or girl that it's worth 3 hours of their time for a plant tour. Do you see what I'm saying? That's a sale. That's literally a sale. Will you let me come out? Let me show you why it's valuable to you. If you let me come out, I'll do this, and I'll be able to provide this. And by providing this, you'll get A, B, C, and D. Can't you see how that benefits you? Hey, that's a good point. I'll go with that. Let's go. No, I don't see the value in that. I don't need that. Okay, you're fucked. That sale's going nowhere until you figure out how they can see the value in the next yes. So that's your sale. Every sale has about 7 to 50 little sales in them. And each one of those little sales, everybody paying attention to the podcast, every one of those little sales requires value. It requires value. So you demonstrating or highlighting the value of that little sale, the value of doing the NDA, the value of the tour, the value of the pilot, the value of an introduction to CEO, the value of sending a product demo. I don't fucking know. The value of the next meeting, the value of introducing you to the team. You need to show the value of getting them to do something else.
Man, I love that. It's basically a way for people to just not get stalled, right? Because they're always focused on them. Again, it just seems so logical, and I'm gonna have to listen back to this about 15 different times, I think, just to see those steps, because that's where things get stuck in the pipeline, right? They're just getting stuck continuously. Before we finish up, I want to ask you about building a sales team. Now, I know this could be a podcast in itself, but what are some of your kind of first principles for building out a sales team, especially a gap selling team?
I want smart people, super, super smart people with strong business acumen or critical thinking skills, tons of curiosity, tons of personal development, what I call deliberate learning, people who find their weaknesses and go out and deliberately try to fill those holes. They got to be super coachable. Those are the ones that are most important to me. Coachable, critical thinking skills, business acumen. I know I just forgot a couple, but yeah,
And in terms of like the processes, like, is it on the sales leader to build out that kind of framework in the back end? Like just for context, like we're currently building like a sales team, and like it's interesting. Like it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of challenge with that. And my first kind of protocol has just been like put the pillars in place for like what they need to fucking know, learn, understand the product, understand everything that's happening in there from my perspective before we could even start engaging with prospects. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So there's the decision criteria on the person. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what type of people do you want. Be very, very clear. What are the decision criteria in the people you want? Then you have to ask yourself, what is the evaluation process, right, to determine do they actually have those criteria? So if you're looking for business acumen and you're looking for drive and you're looking for personal development and you're looking for deliberate learning and you're looking for critical thinking skills and you're looking for curiosity, so those 6, how are you going to evaluate that? Like, what process are you going to put someone through to determine if they have those things? So once you have that, that's your hiring criteria. But then your training criteria is what you actually need them to do. What are they supposed to learn? And that's the skill layer of the sales, right? The skill management layer. So yes, you need to lay that whole thing out. What am I going to teach them? What do they have to know? How are they supposed to execute? What are the steps? What are the process they have to engage in? And that becomes very, very scripted as far as the framework is concerned in a way that they can execute on that framework.
How do you measure success of someone like that then afterwards when you release them into the world?
They've hit their goals. You got to be very clear on what they're expected. Very, very clear. At the end of the day, it's their performance goals, but you get to decide what they are, but they got to hit their goals.
I get you. That makes sense. So basically, that can be a combination of like working closely with them, reviewing their work. Like I remember watching some like sales content on this, which was like, you want to be checking in, reviewing their calls or reviewing their messages, maybe once or twice, like a day in the beginning, and basically just making sure that they're hitting their criteria.
Yeah. I mean, look, if they're new and you're coaching them, you want to be observing how they're applying what you taught them, right? You want to be observing how they're applying what you taught them. And you want to keep guiding them and steering them in the right direction, but you should be seeing a modicum of improvement as you go. And as long as they're improving and those improving are turning into results, then you should be okay.
That makes sense. Do you have any principles on like, I've heard previously like hiring 2 people and then basically like firing the person like that's not performing, or it's like a benchmark versus like hiring for 1, because if you hire for 1, they don't have like any benchmark. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I've always been a fan of hiring 2, but not everybody can afford 2, right? Not everybody afford 2 TWO, not afford 2. But yeah, I mean, look, ideally, and not even firing 1. I don't like the idea of firing 1. Like you hire 2. Think about a 4-quadrant matrix. Hiring 2 minimizes the risk. It's higher risk, but it's a greater probability of success. So the point being is simply, if I hire 2 people, 4-quadrant matrix, they both make it, I win. Big time. Guy A makes it, guy B doesn't. I still win. Took a little bit of a hit on the 3 months the other guy didn't make it or girl didn't make it, right? Took a couple months hit, but not the end of the world. Scenario 3, girl makes it, guy doesn't. I win. Someone's working. I got a person who's making it. I took a little bit of a hit, right? That person, whatever, 2-3 months salary, but it was 6-10 grand most, it shouldn't kill you. Then the worst case is neither one of them make it. Then you can ask, okay, what's wrong? Is the criteria wrong? Is the product even got a chance? If both of them fail, that should be a big red light.
Man, that's amazing. I wish I could pick your brain for much longer. I think we need to come back to it for your second book, right? When you come out with another book, we'll do another one. But man, I want to say a big thank you though. I really appreciate this, and anything I can ever do for you in the future, always let me know.